There's a direct and dangerous line connecting the Supreme Court's ideological turn in the case of Peter Ellis and the recent display of defiance by the Tipurangi Maori Party in Parliament. It begins with Chief Justice Helen Winklemann's declaration in the 2022 Ellis case. She said that tikanga is the first law of New Zealand. And hey presto, just a few years later we have a tikanga haka in the debating chamber of our Parliament, performed as a protest and in breach of parliamentary rules, and now even a special committee considering the integration of tikanga into the parliamentary process. We all saw what happened during the introduction of the Treaty Principles Bill. Members of the Tipurangi Māori Party rose and began performing a haka in the debating chamber. It was not a cultural welcome, not a ceremony, not a respectful cultural addition. It was a protest. It was designed to disrupt, to assert cultural primacy, and to send a message that tikanga overrides the rules of Parliament. Well, unsurprisingly, the Speaker suspended the session and cleared the chamber. But what's following on is even worse. When disciplined, the hakarists refused to appear before the Privileges Committee, a body tasked with investigating breaches of parliamentary rule. The refusal to even acknowledge Parliament's authority to hold them accountable speaks volumes. It tells us that they're not playing by the same rules as everyone else. They're playing by tikanga, or rather their own selective interpretation of it. Tikanga is not law, not in the sense understood by a liberal democracy. It's not a system based on written statutes, universal rights, or democratic accountability. It's a fluid, variable, and often contradictory set of tribal customs. It evolved in isolated kin-based communities to govern relationships within and between hapu and iwi. It was not enforced by impartial institutions but by mana, tapu, utu, and the threat of violence. Tikanga is irrational and driven by superstition. Consider one typical example. In traditional tikanga, it was an honourable act to attack a neighbouring tribe during a tangihanga, that's a funeral. That is, while they were mourning a recently deceased chief. Now, this was not done to take advantage of the leaderless tribe's moment of weakness, as logic might suggest, but rather the bloodletting was done out of respect for the deceased chief's mana. In other words, lethal violence was seen as an act of tribute. This is not a moral or legal framework fit for modern society. It's not rational, it's not consistent with any conception of justice that respects human dignity and personal autonomy. And yet in Ellis, a case that had nothing to do with tikanga at all, Winklemann went out of her way to pronounce tikanga as foundational. The Chief Justice's declaration that tikanga Maori is the first law of New Zealand deserves rigorous scrutiny and complete rejection. There are at least two fundamental and fatal objections to Winklemann's ruling. The first is that the New Zealand whose judicial branch is presided over by Winklemann did not exist until after 1840. There was no sovereign nation called New Zealand prior to the signing of the Treaty of Waitangi. Winklemann's claim conflates the land making up the pre-1840 islands of New Zealand and the sovereign state of New Zealand founded by the treaty in 1840 on those islands. Tikanga was never the law of any nation-state because no such state existed. It's legally incoherent to claim that something was the first law of a political entity that had not yet come into being. The second fatal objection is that the treaty itself describes the land as lawless. The preamble of the Treaty of Waitangi explicitly refers to the lawless state of the land and expresses the Crown's intention to establish law and order. The entire basis for British intervention in 1840, the Treaty of Waitangi, and the creation of a unified legal system was that there was no established rule of law within the New Zealand islands. To now claim that tikanga was the first law is to contradict the very document that founded New Zealand's constitutional order. This is irrefutable Orwellian doublethink, holding two contradictory views and believing both. One view is that New Zealand was lawless prior to 1840, and the other view that tikanga was the law of New Zealand prior to 1840. This is also Orwellian newspeak. The New Zealand that Winklemann says was not lawless is not the sovereign state founded in the treaty. Instead, it's a few islands in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. Winklemann is redefining the meaning of the name of the nation-state of New Zealand, whose judiciary she presides over. She's literally claiming to be the Chief Justice of Fantasyland. Winklemann ignores that the Treaty of Waitangi promises the people inhabiting the New Zealand islands the Queen's governance. Never in the 1,000-year history of the British Crown has tikanga ever been a feature of the Queen's governance. Tikanga is not rooted in New Zealand's British legal history, it's rooted in native Polynesian history. Winklemann's ruling has encouraged ethno-Marxist political activists from the Tipurangi Maori Party to challenge the foundations of our Westminster system of democracy with Maori tribal woo-woo. And that's not to say that tikanga has no value. It has anthropological value and it has cultural meaning for those who practice it. But the elevation of tikanga into courtrooms and parliamentary chambers does not preserve culture, it politicises it. It turns culture into power, and that is profoundly dangerous. When Tipurangi Māori Party MPs perform a haka to defy parliamentary authority, they are not engaging in respectful cultural expression. They are engaging in political theatre designed to intimidate, to silence, to shame, to claim exceptionalism, and to subvert the operation of our parliament. The haka in this context is a challenge, not a dialogue. It is the antithesis of reasoned debate. Parliament is not a marae. It's not governed by the rules of ritual and collective identity. And let's be honest about what this really means. If tikanga can justify a haka in Parliament today, what will it justify tomorrow? Special voting rights, tribal vetoes, a separate legal system? These are not hypotheticals. These are already being proposed in various forms. The co-governance model is one such example, a system in which authority is split not between branches of government, but between citizens and tribes. And that's not democracy, that's apartheid by ancestry. New Zealand must decide what kind of country it wants to be. Are we a modern nation of laws or a confederation of tribes? Do we resolve our differences through democratic institutions or through ritualized performance? Do we believe in universal rights or do we divide our citizens into categories of entitlement based on heritage? It's not racist to ask these questions, it's responsible, because if we fail to ask them now, we'll wake up one day in a country that we no longer recognise. A country where the rules are not made in Parliament but in tribal councils, and where justice is not delivered by reason but by ritual, and where the haka is not a cultural treasure but a political threat. Helen Winklemann has seriously gaslit the public in the Ellis case. Parliament must resist. It must draw a clear and unambiguous line. Tikanga has no legislative authority, it has no constitutional status, and it must not be used to defy the Speaker or disrupt the House or to avoid accountability. Tikanga is not the first law of New Zealand. Tikanga is the way of doing things in a communist, aristocratic, tribal society. It has no place in our Westminster system of democracy. What do you think? Is Winklemann one of the useful idiots on the liberal left? Or is she a calculating neo-Marxist that has graduated from the Auckland Frankfurt University? Do we need to find ourselves a new Chief Justice? And come to that, do we need to run a wide broom through our entire judiciary? Or should we be letting alternative systems of law like tikanga-based communism infect our Westminster democracy? And will that be our downfall? Leave a comment, let me know what you think. Thanks for watching. Give us a like, and do hit subscribe to be notified of new content as it drops. See you next time.